Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at some specific source material. It gives a particular view on the recent Iran-Israel events and, the wider situation in the region.
That's right. And it's really important to stay upfront. This material we're looking at is one perspective. These are complex events, lots of viewpoints out there.
Absolutely. So our job today, our mission, is to unpack this source, really get into its arguments, what it's actually saying happened.
Okay, so where does it start?
Well, it kicks off with a really forceful claim about the recent events. The source argues they weren't just, defensive moves.
Mm-hmm.
It calls them a massive pre-planned military assault by Israel on Iranian soil. It even gives it a name, Operation Rising Lion, according to this source.
Operation Rising Lion.
Yeah,
Okay, and does it specify what the targets were?
it does. It lists things you might expect, like nuclear sites, missile depots.
Hmm.
But interestingly, this source also claims residential areas were hit.
Residential areas, too.
Yeah, and the source frames that combination, the military and civilian sites, as looking like, quote, a reckless declaration of war.
Wow. Okay, so that's the description of the initial alleged action. How does this source describe Iran's reaction?
It says Iran responded within hours, launching hundreds of drones and missiles towards Israeli airspace.
And does this source give that a name, too?
It does. Operation True Promise Third is what this source calls it.
Right. Operation True Promise Third. So this rapid exchange, how does the source characterize that?
It sees it very clearly as a dangerous tit for tat. That's the term it uses.
Yeah.
And it explicitly says this dynamic is a threat, not just to the two countries, but potentially the whole Middle East.
So a really high-stakes interpretation of events.
Definitely. And another thing this source really hits hard is what it sees as sort of a global silence afterwards.
Balance in what way?
It notes a lack of UN resolutions condemning the initial strikes it described. And it claims there was no firm condemnation from Western countries either.
Okay, so it's pointing to a perceived lack of international censure.
Exactly. And it builds on that. It brings up the common phrase, Israel has the right to defend itself, which, we hear a lot.
Right.
But this source then asks, well, what about Iran's right to sovereignty? And it immediately connects this to the situation in Gaza.
Oh, bringing Gaza into the frame. How so? It mentions Palestinians in Gaza being, quote, bombed for months without mercy, and basically asks why the international response seems different. It draws a direct line between the two situations, according to this perspective.
So it's definitely constructing an argument about double standards from its point of view.
It seems that way. And it doesn't see this Iran-Israel incident in isolation, does it?
No, not at all. It argues this is part of what it calls a systemic pattern.
Yeah.
It lists alleged Israeli strikes not just on Iran, but also Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, alongside what it terms the brutal campaign in Gaza.
And based on that pattern, it then poses a question, I believe.
It does. A very pointed one. It asks,
Right.
which other country attacks its neighbors so regularly and, according to the source, still gets global support?
And the source's answer.
Stark. It says not a single one. The conclusion this source draws is that Israel, within this alleged pattern, has become the most militarized aggressor in the region.
And it assigns responsibility for enabling this.
Yes, it claims this is possible because Israel is, quote, armed by the U.S. and protected diplomatically by Europe.
Okay.
And it names the targets of this alleged aggression as Iran, Lebanon, and significantly, any voice that speaks for Palestinian freedom.
It keeps circling back to the Palestinian issue then.
It does. It stresses that even while this is happening with Iran, Gaza continues to suffer. The West Bank is under lockdown, children dying, and the source claims the world shrugs.
So there's a strong element of accusation there, directed outwards.
Very much so. It leads directly to a claim about Western governments being complicit.
Complicit, how does it back that up?
It points to specific things. Providing arms to Israel, vetoing UN resolutions critical of Israel. The source sees this as talking about human rights while ignoring alleged war crimes.
Right, it calls that hypocrisy or even policy-based injustice.
Exactly. And then it asks, well, how can these Western powers act surprised when Iran or Lebanon react?
So the argument is cause and effect, essentially.
Pretty much. The source concludes, they created this fire, and now it's burning across the region. It sees a direct causal link.
Okay, so the source feels its purpose is to expose this pattern.
Yes, exactly. To reveal what it considers the truth. It argues that Israel's alleged unchecked aggression, backed by the West, is now a threat to global peace.
And it worries about escalation.
Big time. It expresses real concern that if things don't change, this conflict could easily spread. It mentions Syria, Lebanon, Pakistan, maybe even further, escalating into something much bigger.
Right, a regional or even global conflict scenario.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main arguments from this specific source we've been looking at.
Sounds good.
It portrays Israel as the aggressor, acting without checks. It alleges Western governments are complicit through actions like arms supplies and UN vetoes.
And it argues this whole dynamic is actively making the regional conflict worse, escalating things.
Yeah, and the core argument really is that this alleged pattern, the way the source describes it, is a direct threat to global peace.
With the potential to pull in other countries, the source names, like Syria, Lebanon, Pakistan.
Right. Now, the source finishes by speaking directly to you, the listener. It has a call to action based on its perspective.
Mm-hmm. And the final thought it wants to leave people with is essentially this question.
Go ahead.
Will we wait for another war before we wake up? Or, it asks, will we demand justice now for Iran, for Gaza, for everyone suffering, by holding all powers accountable?
Whether in Tel Aviv, Washington, or Tehran. That's the key part.
Exactly. Because, as the source puts it, justice isn't justice until it's for everyone.
A very powerful concluding statement from the source material itself. Understanding that viewpoint, what this source is arguing is, well, it's crucial for grasping one particular narrative in this very complex situation.
Absolutely. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today.